Green. Okay, we'll check that. Director Paris.
Present.
Kate White. Phyllis Dannon.
I'm here.
Craig Carden.
Here.
Matt Knutson.
Here.
And Pete Thompson.
Here. Derek, this is Rob. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, loud and clear. Thank you.
Thank you. We're on item 3, adoption of the agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda?
This is Derek. I'll adopt it. Motion
Motion by Derek. Is there a second?
Adam is second.
Motion second by Adam. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of the motion to adopt the agenda by roll call vote?
Director Riki.
Yes.
Director Calandri.
Yes.
Director McLaren.
Yes.
Director Urosic.
Yes.
And Director Paris.
Yes. We're on item 4, public comments for non-agenda items. Is there any public comments for non-agenda items? Give you 30 seconds to be recognized. Hearing no public comments for non-agenda items. We'll move on to 5. There are no special presentations. We'll move on to 6, consent agenda. Matt?
Good morning. This is Matt. So in your packet, begin on page 7, is our summary of the bills recommending to be paid or approved today. The total amount for this month is $31,543.52. And you can see as of September 30th, we have just over $202,000 available in our checking account. And we also have just over $65,000 in replacement water assessments in our money market account. So all the backup is included in the packet, as well as the treasurer's report for the month ending September 30th, the accounts receivables aging summary, and the minutes from the last meeting. I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Are there any questions on the consent agenda? Hearing no questions, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
This is Adam.
So
I
moved.
move that. Okay, John.
Motion made by Adam, seconded by
Second by John.
John, is that correct? Did you second the motion?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. And any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of the motion by roll call vote?
Director Riki.
Yes.
Director Calandri.
Yes.
Director McLaren.
Yes.
Director Urosic.
Yes.
And Director Paris.
Yes. Motion carried unanimously. We're now on the advisory committee report. James?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're pretty low, but we hear you.
I'll put it a little closer. All right. Good morning. So the advisory committee met last Wednesday on the 21st to discuss the action items. And I'll go down the list and just read the report. New production applications. The committee discussed and recommended approval of the applications. Transfer applications. Those are all unique. The committee discussed and has recommendations for the applications. The Craig Van Dam to Gene Wheeler Farms. The committee recommended the application not be approved until Gene Wheeler Farms intervene in the judgment. The second one, WDS, California 2 to AVAC. The committee would like the following questions answered before making a decision on the approved application. Does stored water transferred after the date of the final judgment need to be covered by a storage agreement? 2, if a storage agreement is required, how should a storage agreement application process be coordinated with the transfer application process? 3, how should terms and conditions on the operations of the transfer be coordinated with the terms and conditions of the storage agreement, or conditions on the operations of the pre-existing water bank? 4, how does the Watermaster engineer account for transfers of stored water? And 5, is a mutual or material injury analysis adequate? And then we have Terra Bonita Ranch from Phelan Pinyon Hill, TSD. The committee discussed and does not take a position on the transfer application at this time. During the discussion, questions were raised about the involvement of the two adjudicated basins, the Mojave and the Antelope Valley. C, the Antelope Valley Water Contractors Letters for USGS Groundwater Monitoring Program.
Let's keep that one.
The committee discussed and directs staff to come back with line items showing the shared costs. The committee would like
You know, Our Lady
to know the costs and benefits of the program for each of the participating entities. And then D, memorandum regarding recovery of
Should
attorney
I
fees.
toss it?
The committee discussed and recommended staff to propose an amendment to the rules and regs. The committee recommends staff itemize all costs incurred by the attorney and the Watermaster engineer. And that concludes the report. Any questions?
Any questions by directors? Hearing no questions. Appreciate the report, James, and we'll move on to action items, well applications, introduction applications, and endpoint of extraction applications. I believe that's the Phyllis show.
I guess Phyllis is going to defer to the Kate show.
Okay, Kate, thank you.
Yep, no problem. Good morning. This is Kate White from Todd Groundwater. Can everyone hear me okay?
Not much.
All right, let me turn up my volume. This should be better. Is that better?
And Kate, could you tell me what page you're going to start on?
I'm going to start on page 32 of the packet.
Thank you.
So we're going to start with the new production applications, and there are 2 up for approval this month, and they're listed on page 32 of the packet. And the first application starts on page 34, and the applicant would like to use 1 acre-foot per year for a single-family home in the central Antelope Valley sub-area. And so this is for new production. And his parcel is located on a map on page 46 in the packet. And we feel that given the small amount of production and the obligation to pay replacement water assessment, that the potential for a material injury as defined in the judgment is negligible for this application. Are there any questions regarding it?
Is the applicant, this is Adam, is the applicant a small pumper or it's not, or is not on the list?
He's part of the Willis class, and so he's not on the list, but since he's part of the Willis class, he doesn't need to intervene into the judgment.
All right, and then they will pay the replacement, I take it.
Correct.
All right.
All right, and the second new production application starts on page 48. And this is also for domestic use in the central Antelope Valley sub-area. And the applicant would like to use 1.2 acre-feet per year of water for a single-family home in a landscaped area with fruit trees and some farm animals. And his parcel location is shown on the figure on page 39 of the packet.
And the same thing, this is in the Walls class?
Yep, same thing in the Willis class. And again, given the small amount of production and the obligation to pay a replacement water assessment, we find that the potential for material injury as defined in the judgment is negligible for this applicant as well.
Okay, I just, one question. Is there a limit to how much water a Wallace class member can pump? I thought it was 1 acre-foot.
I don't think there is a limit, but I'm going to have to.
We have a limit on the small pumpers, 3 acre-feet.
Correct. Well, they could
pump more than that would have to pay a replacement water assessment above.
Maybe
3
Greg
acre
can
feet.
help with this.
Yeah, I'm not aware of a limitation on that, Adam. I'll have to check that. But because they don't need to intervene, and because they're subject to replacement water assessment for all their production, that substantially addresses the concern. But I will check that.
Okay, I don't know why I seem to think up to 1 acre foot, but I could be wrong too. I don't know if there is any of the attorneys that were involved in the judgment online to confirm or disprove what I'm saying. Keith, I know Warren is not on, but Keith, are you on the call?
I am on the call. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, Keith. Why do I seem to think that they are limited to 1 acre foot? Am I wrong?
Well, we're talking about somebody in the dormant group.
Correct.
And so the dormant group doesn't have any assessment-free pumping at all. But they can pump provided they pay a replenishment fee on all of their pumping. So I think the idea is they'll be replacing the water.
Okay, there is no limit then.
Right, because the theory is that it's being replaced.
Okay.
So does it state that anywhere that they're going to replace it in the application?
Yes,
should.
Yes.
they'll be paying a replacement water assessment for all water pumped.
Yeah. What number is that on the application?
Okay.
I apologize. I'm looking for it. I can't find it.
It's on page 36. It's page 2 of 2 of the application. And just above their signature, they say the very first sentence, I understand and agree to be bound by the terms of the Antelope Valley adjudication judgment.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Phyllis.
Okay, any further discussion? Okay, go ahead, Kate.
All right, so for those 2 applications, there's a resolution for approval, and that's R20-30, and that's on page 30 of the packet.
Are you done?
And so we recommend approval of that resolution.
Great. Thank you. Anything else, Kate?
No, that's it for the new production applications.
Very good. Is there a motion to approve resolution R2030, the new production or the new production applications, the new point of extraction?
I move that we approve resolution R2030. This is Adam.
Is there a second?
John will second.
Motion second by John. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor of the motion by roll call vote?
Director Ricci,
Yes.
Director Calandri,
Yes.
Director McLaren,
Yes.
Director Urosic,
Yes.
and Director Paris.
Yes, motion's carried unanimously. We're now on item B, transfer applications.
This is
And
Kate.
Kate, go ahead.
I'll take those too. So there are 3 transfer applications for approval this month. The first one is for a permanent transfer of 1 acre foot per year from Craig Van Dam to Gene Wheeler Farms. And this is based on the condition that Gene Wheeler Farms intervenes into the judgment. And that
What page is that, Kate?
That starts on page 61, I think, of the packet.
Let me just say, this is Craig. Director Ricci, the resolution approving the transfer subject to successful intervention is in the resolution R-20-31 at page 57.
Thank you.
We've done this before, just to remind the board, we've done this before where the approval is conditioned on successful intervention in the judgment, and we've actually conditioned at times that the intervention will be done within 30 days, which is what this resolution provides for. So we will follow it. We will make sure, and there's understanding that absent successful intervention in the judgment, that this transfer is not effective until that happens.
This is David Leventhal. I'd like to, can I chime in? As everyone knows, I'm representing the parties that filed this transfer application. I already have a hearing date. The next available hearing date on the motions to intervene is December 8th. The court gave me that hearing date a couple weeks ago because the court is dark during November. So the motion to intervene is basically ready to go. It'll be filed within a couple days after the board approves this resolution. But the order, the hearing on that motion wouldn't be heard until December 8th, and then presumably a court order would issue either that day or maybe a few days after. One other thing just to point out, on page 57 of the packet is the resolution. There's a typo in that resolution. It refers to Michael Herbert must file a motion. That was obviously a carryover from a prior resolution. And I'm available for any other questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Leventhal, and I don't know if you heard, but that will be changed in the resolution. Thank you for pointing that out to us. And Craig, were you finished, or did you have any further information?
No, and appreciate the confirmation by Mr. Leventhal that obviously the motion to intervene will be filed well within the 30-day condition found in the resolution.
Great. Kate, you're recommending approval?
Yes, I am recommending approval.
Is there any further discussion?
This is Derek. Just a question for Craig, not really in regards to this application, but for others, where there is this requirement to intervene. You may have updated us. Is there a way we can just get in the next board meeting as a follow-up, which ones have that we've approved with this requirement to intervene and which ones haven't, and just get a status report?
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Patty, will you put that on the agenda for just an update on transfers where? Okay, any further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, is there a motion to approve transfer application R-2031?
This is again Adam. I will move that we approve Resolution 2031.
Motion made by Adam. Is there a second?
This is Derek. I'll second it.
Motion second by Derek. Is there any further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor of the motion by roll call vote?
Director Reekie?
Yes.
Director Calandri? Director Calandri? Director McLaren?
Yes.
Director Urosic?
Yes.
Director Paris?
Yes.
And Director Calandri?
Yes.
Gotcha, thank you.
Motion's carried unanimous to approve resolution number R-2031. We're now on item B, the transfer request for Bonita Ranch to Phelan Pinyon Hills. Kate?
Yep, I can take this one. So there are two additional transfer applications for approval, and those are listed on page 81 of the packet. And the first transfer is for a transfer of production rights from Terra Bonita Ranch to Phelan Pinion Hills Community Services District. And the Watermaster General Counsel prepared a memo regarding this transfer, and that starts on page 83 of the packet. And I don't know if we want to talk about the memo first or the application first. Does anybody have? So on page 83 of the packet, there's a memo done by Craig regarding this transfer. Do we want to discuss that memo first or jump into the application first?
I think it would be best if we discuss the memo first. This is Adam.
Okay. Craig, do you want to do that or do you want me to do the memo?
Oh, sure. The board has had in part the content of the memo before it previously. And the alternative approaches are discussed in the memo, and Phelan's position in the judgment and in the litigation that it does not have production right and must pay under the judgment for any replacement water assessment. And it's our legal opinion that the judgment requires Phelan to pay the replacement water assessment. May want to consider another option to try and deal with the replenishment issue raised by Phelan's pumping outside the terms of the judgment and not paying replacement water assessment. We've presented what another option for the board to consider. But just so the board is clear, it's our legal opinion that the judgment requires the payment of replacement water assessment so that the water is restored through AVEC. And so the options are presented in the memo, explained in the memo, what they are. Last time we presented part of this memo to the board, there was a substantial reaction from a number of the parties that the board doesn't have the authority to change the terms of the judgment and allow Phelan to meet their replacement water obligation by the use of transferred water. And this board may remember a lot of that discussion that we had at that time. But just wanted it all to be presented to the board in one memo so that you could consider what the alternatives are, but clear that it's our position as council that there's no legal basis to do this. We do present the option of a one-time transfer in order to meet the replacement water obligation, and the condition to do that the replacement obligation be recognize the addition of return flow waters also, as recommended by the Watermaster engineer in her report. So with that, open it up to questions from the board, and might be helpful to have Kate's material injury analysis as part of the discussion also.
And how many acres, this is John, how many acre feet are we talking about again on that transfer?
The total transfer is, it would be occur over a 5-year period, and it's 2,150 acre feet.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you.
And Phelan has incurred, Director Calandri has incurred replacement obligations for the years 2016 to 2019 in the amount of 1335.80 acre feet.
What years was that again?
2016 to 2019.
Thank you.
Hey, Craig, I'm sorry. Rob, go ahead.
No, I'm just recognizing you. Go ahead, Derek.
Thank you. Craig, can you, for the board's sake, maybe I'll just say for my sake, and the public is, can you explain a little further there's no legal basis for this transfer, your comment there?
Yeah. The judgment makes it clear that Phelan does not have a production right under the judgment, but instead has a right to produce groundwater. We also believe and explain in the memo at page 3 that only production rights can be transferred, and the rules and regulations are pretty explicit, or very explicit, that transfers of right to produce groundwater by Phelan is not allowed. That's in the rules and regulations at Article 13, subsection 5. So it's our opinion that the judgment and the rules and regulations are explicit that Phelan is prohibited from transferring its right to produce groundwater, and likewise transferred water retains its original source under the rules and regulations. And because Tierra Bonita is proposing to transfer a production right to Phelan, which Phelan is under the judgment has no right to hold, that process is not allowed pursuant to the explicit terms of the judgment.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Any further questions of Craig? Hearing none. Kate, you want to finish up with your material harm analysis?
Sure, I can walk through it. So Tierra Bonita Ranch would like to transfer 430 acre-feet of water of their production rights to Phelan each year over a 5-year period, and that's from 2020 to 2024 for a total amount of 2,150 acre-feet. Tierra Bonita Ranch has a production right of 430, and prior to 2020, they leased their land to Calandry Farms for agricultural use. But in early June, they provided documentation that their 3 wells, their on-site wells, have been capped and the pumps and meters were removed. So they're no longer pumping water on their property. Phelan can pump up to 1,200 acre-feet per year from its well number 14 and export that water to the service area in San Bernardino County, provided they pay a replacement water assessment. And Phelan has pumped a total of 1,335.80 acre-feet of water during the 2016 and 2019 time period, and that's shown at the bottom of page 89 of the packet. And Phelan would like to use this transfer to meet its replacement water obligations. The transfer application indicates that Phelan intends to use the transferred production rights to satisfy past replacement water obligations and then toward any future pumping. Therefore, if this transfer is approved, the remaining water, which is about 814 acre-feet, would be available for additional future Phelan production. And that past replacement water obligations would be fulfilled over the 2020 to 2023 time period. And that's shown at near the top of our second page of our letter, which is page 90 in the packet. And the figure on page 93 of the packet shows locations of where Tierra Bonita Ranch parcels are, and they're in the central Antelope Valley sub-area. And Phelan's well number 14 is located on the eastern edge of the southeast sub-area. And the Tierra Bonita Ranch parcels are within the large cone of depression, centered a few miles to the southwest, and a decrease in production in this area could benefit local water levels. We also have some hydrographs in the application on pages 94 and 95 of the packet. And the hydrographs on page 94, which are near Feelin's well number 14, show an overall decline in water levels. However, water levels in Feelin's well number 14 and other nearby wells do not reflect similar declines, and that's on page 95 in the packet, and that's information from the Mojave Watermaster. Let's see. So most of the requested transfer would be used to fulfill Feelin's current replacement water assessments from 2016 and 2019, and it would not represent new production. The amount of transfer in excess of the current replacement water obligation would be applied to future production and would not likely result in adverse water level impacts in the vicinity of Feelin's well number 14. However, the export of this additional amount, as well as the export of the previous amounts of water, would result in a net loss of return flows if replaced by a transfer rather than imported water. In actual calculations, return flows are dependent upon many factors, and it's difficult to determine those ones related to the export of this water in this case. However, the judgment does provide some guidance on return flows that are associated with imported water. And for example, for municipal water use, return flows at 39%. And we feel that if its transfer is approved, we recommend that the transfer amount
Kate, what happened?
Sorry, Kate. Kate, unmute yourself. We had a lot of
That's so interesting. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now, but we didn't hear you for probably a minute or so.
Oh, that's quite a while. It's funny, it just... Go ahead.
There's a lot of background noise.
Huh. That's interesting. Okay, so let's see. I was talking. Did you hear discussing water level hydrographs?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see. Go back. So the amount of transfer in excess of current water replacement obligations would be applied to future production as allowed by the judgment, and would not likely result in adverse water level impacts in the vicinity of Feelin's well number 14. However, the export of this additional amount, as well as the export of the previous amounts of water, would result in a net loss of return flows if replaced by a transfer rather than imported water. And actual calculations of return flows are dependent upon many factors, and in this case, it's difficult to determine those related to the export of this water. However, the judgment does provide some guidance on return flow amounts that might be associated with imported water. For example, a 39% return flow rate is used for municipal water use. So we feel that if this transfer is approved by the board, we recommend that the transfer amount be dedicated to the replenishment of the exported water plus an extra 39% to compensate for the loss of return flows. And we feel if this occurs, there'll be no material injury. However, we understand that there are special circumstances in the Feelin in the judgment that require a legal opinion, and we would like to defer to the Watermaster Council and other parties to the judgment as to the final recommendation regarding the approval of this transfer. But we feel that if full amount was applied, it would cover the plus the 39%, there'd be no material injury associated with it. Are there any questions?
Directors, are there any questions of Kate at this time? Thank you, Kate.
You're welcome.
And is there anybody else in the public that wants to present? And can we open the mic so we can do that?
Keith Lemieux has a question.
Okay, Keith, I think you have a question. Open Keith's mic, please.
Well, I have a comment. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, go ahead.
I may be repeating this from last time, but I just want to say that this proposal is contrary to the plain language of the judgment, which I believe means it's beyond the power of this Watermaster. I'd like to point out that transferring water rights is not a common law right. It's something that's granted to the parties through the judgment, meaning it's a privilege granted to settling parties. Phelan has not settled with us, and has not entered the judgment. So this amounts to giving Phelan a benefit without Phelan having to agree to the other terms of the settlement. So I think it's a bad concept. Ultimately, this kind of thing amounts to a settlement of the underlying case, in effect, or at least a partial settlement, which I think is beyond the power of this Watermaster to do. If the parties to the case want to allow this, then the parties to the case would have to sit down with Phelan and make that arrangement. And I'm certain that the parties of the case would perhaps require other things as part of that settlement. So I would say, I'm on behalf of my clients, we're strongly opposed.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Further comments, I think.
Yeah, there's yes, Bradley Harema wants to speak.
This is Brad Harriman on behalf of Tierra Bonita. I think Don Bartz and June Aylan for Phelan Pinion Hills also wanted to speak, and I would let them go first.
Okay.
June and Chad want to speak.
Don, did you want to speak first? This is June.
Hi, June. This is who do you want to speak at this time?
I was asking Don Bartz if he wanted to speak before me.
Okay. Don Bartz, are you available and would you like to speak?
You can unmute yourself.
Don, you can unmute your.
I believe he's on the phone, so.
Well, Star 6.
Wait 1 second, June. Holly, what can we?
He can unmute himself with star 6. I can't unmute him. He has to unmute himself.
If you press star 6, you can unmute yourself if you are available out there.
Yes, good morning. This is Don Bartz of Phelan Pinion Hills. I apologize for not being an expert in unmuting myself on the phone in these situations.
No problem.
But again, good morning. We would like to move forward and get this settled. I have talked to my board. We would agree with the potential for transfer, understanding that it may need to go before the judge. We also agree that we would be willing to use the 39% number for the return flows, which would be an additional 520 acre feet of groundwater that would not be pumped out of the basin. So we would ask that you would give us some support in this. We would like to have the issues resolved and move forward. And we thank you for your consideration in this.
Thank you. Directors, any questions of Don? Greg, any questions of Don at this point?
No.
Okay. June, I think you're up.
Yes, this is June Aylan, counsel for Phelan Pinion Hills. I just want to make clear something that Don alluded to in his remarks. This is water that would not be pumped. So it's technically a transfer of a production right, but the water is not going to be produced. The second point I would like to make in terms of Mr. Lemieux's argument that this is a settlement that requires involving other parties, the replacement water obligation is owed to the Watermaster. And so it is up to the Watermaster to decide whether it will take payment in some other form. I don't think that involves other parties to the judgment, but it would require action by the Watermaster. So it is appropriate for this to be on the Watermaster's agenda. And that's all I have. I will pass the baton to Mr. Harima.
Good morning. Brad Harima on behalf of Tierra Bonita Ranch. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Brad.
All right, great. Thanks for the opportunity to speak this morning. In regard to the memorandum that's prepared by council here, the focus, and perhaps understandably, is on the history of the issues with the CSD in this regard, but there isn't really an exploration or a description of what Tierra Bonita's rights are in terms of being able to transfer its production rights. And under the judgment, it's able to do that if there is no material injury. As you heard from the Watermaster engineer, with the CSD's agreement to the premium or the kicker for the return flows, there is no material injury. And so Tierra Bonita's rights here are to be able to transfer its production rights. The memo that's been prepared by council has a conclusion that for some reason the CSD isn't able to receive the transfer of production right, and that appears to be based on a citation to the rules and regulations where it states that the CSD may not transfer its production right or transfer its right to produce water. But that doesn't mean that it may not receive a transfer of production rights. There are many other parties who were not even listed in the judgment who've intervened or will intervene, such as George Wheeler in the case that was approved by the board earlier, that are receiving production rights. And so we don't think that this case should be treated any different. Finally, in regard to what Mr. Lemieux said about the what this transfer would mean for Phelan, they have agreed. They've submitted the application to transfer. They've agreed to the terms that are being proposed. Whether or not they still have an appeal pending of the judgment, I think is immaterial in this case, in that they have submitted themselves to this process and agreed to the conditions that are being proposed. So I would request that the board go ahead and approve the transfer. And I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Are there any questions? Any questions of Brad? Okay. Any response, Craig or Kate?
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of things in response to Brad's comments. I don't think this board can separate the transfer application from the use of the transfer by Phelan. And the use of the transfer is explicitly made evident in their application that it's for replacement water assessment purposes. And in fact, the entire material injury analysis was based on how Phelan plans to use that transferred water. So I don't think this board can look at it only from the perspective of Tierra Bonita and whether they have standing to transfer a production right to another party. And as far as the judgment is concerned, I think I tried to address that in response to Director Urisek's comments about the judgment. But just to remind the board, only production rights can be transferred under the judgment. That's section 16.1 of the judgment. And Phelan doesn't have any production rights, but it has what the judgment calls a right to produce groundwater. And the rules and regs then prohibit explicitly Phelan from transferring its right to produce groundwater, and the judgment and rules and regs, I believe, can be construed to prohibit Phelan from receiving a transfer of production rights. So transferred water, as I mentioned earlier, retains its original source type. because Kara Bonita is proposing to transfer production right to Phelan, then Phelan is purporting to receive a production right which is explicitly disallowed under the judgment. So with those comments, some of which are a rehash of what I've already said, I think the board has all the issues appropriately laid out for it.
This is Brad Harriman. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to respond, but
Brad?
I would like to if I can.
Yeah, Brad.
Yeah. So in our view, the description of Phelan's rights were reflective of what they were, not whether they can receive any production rights. And again, the section in the rules and regs that's being cited to doesn't say that Phelan cannot receive a transfer. It simply says that it may not transfer the right that it has to produce water. It does not say it cannot receive a transfer.
Okay, Brad, thank you. Any other discussion?
Keith Lemieux, who has his hand raised.
Keith, I believe you have your virtual hand raised.
Yeah, again, I heard an argument raised by Ms. Aylen about that the replacement water requirement is something owed to the Watermaster, and therefore the Watermaster has the ability to change the requirement or accept something less or settle the requirement. And I just want to emphasize again, Watermaster Council has correctly indicated that this request goes against the plain language of the judgment. And it's, in my opinion, and I think it would be wise to consider the judgment as something that the Watermaster itself is not in a position to amend. That's all.
Thank you, Keith. Any further discussion? Hearing no further discussion. Is there a motion to approve the transfer request? And that's resolution number R2032. Is that just the transfer request for? Okay, so there's two. So, Kate, you have one more to present to us?
I do.
Okay. Why don't you go on to the second one, please?
Okay. So the second transfer starts on page 106 of the packet. And it's a transfer of imported stored water that WDS California 2 has stored in the Willow Springs Water Bank, and they want to move it to AVEC's West Side Water Bank. Yeah, a similar transfer of WDS California 2 water was approved in April, and that was transferring it from the Willow Springs Water Bank to the West Side Water Bank. And in April, that transfer amounted to 11,643 acre feet. And in this case, they want to transfer, I have that written down, 2,266.5 acre feet of water. The figure on page 107 of the package shows the locations of the two water banks, which is the Willow Springs Water Bank and the West Side Water Bank, and they're both in the West Antelope sub-area. And given the proximity of the two banking areas and the mounding and radial flow over time, the stored water in the two banks have likely commingled, and both are flowing down gradient toward the central Antelope Valley sub-area. And the transfer just simply shifts the recovery location a few miles to the southeast and allows for increased pumping in an area of relatively high water levels in the West Antelope Valley sub-area. And so we find that the potential for material injury as defined in the judgment is negligible. But the advisory committee had some questions regarding this transfer, and I don't know if this is a good time to go over those. Those were listed in their memo, which is on page 5 of the packet, I think. And I'll do my best to answer those, and anyone else can chime in or ask questions as I go along. And the first question is, does stored water transferred after the date of the final judgment need to be covered by a storage agreement? And the answer is yes. But at this point, we're allowing it to occur if both the source bank and the recipient bank are pre-existing banks that were operating when the judgment was finalized. And, we're hoping to complete storage agreements for all these pre-existing banks within the first half of 2021. So that is my answer for number one. And question number two is, if a storage agreement is required, how should a storage agreement application process be coordinated with a transfer application process? And I think that the transfer approval would be dependent upon a successfully completed storage agreement. And the third question is, how should terms and conditions on the operations for the transfer be coordinated with the terms and conditions of the storage agreement or conditions on the operations of the pre-existing bank? So the transferred water would become stored water in the bank it was transferred to. And then the operations would fall under the storage agreement for that bank. And then I think if the transfer would result in a bank operating outside its original storage agreement, like for example, if more water was planned to be extracted annually than reported in the original storage agreement, then I think a modification to the storage agreement would be needed as a condition of the approval of the transfer. The fourth question is, how does the Watermaster engineer account for transfers of stored water? And these amounts are subtracted from or credited to the appropriate banks. And this information is reported in Appendix C of the annual reports. And the last question is the material injury analysis adequate? For example, with respect to rate of extraction. And in this case, the transferred water would become a part of the pool of water in the West Side Water Bank, and it would fall under the operating conditions of that bank as defined in its CEQA and environmental documents. And again, we hope that to kind of have these all defined when we finalize storage agreements for pre-existing banks. So did that answer your questions? I'm sure you have questions, additional questions regarding that.
Okay, directors, any questions?
Well, this is Adam. So these storage agreements, the transfer cannot happen. I heard you saying this transfer will be conditioned on a successful completion of storage agreements?
Yeah, unless it's a pre-existing bank that was in operation when the judgment was finalized. So you can't be moving around imported stored water without having a storage agreement or be affiliated with a pre-existing bank.
Unless you were a pre-existing bank.
Yeah, correct.
So will the pre-existing bank have a storage agreement? I mean, they will prepare a storage agreement, right?
Yes, I think that's it.
And they done so now. Why wait until 2021?
Well, I mean, I think that we're trying to figure out what pre-existing banks actually had to do regarding storage agreements, and I think there's a lot of different opinions out there regarding that. And I think with the rules and regulations, we kind of narrowed it down a little bit. But I think that's the next thing we need to tackle is what exactly is that storage agreement going to look like?
Okay, so is this transfer conditioned on having a storage agreement, or
No.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yeah,
We're
yes.
approving it on the condition that there will be a storage agreement for these banks, and then that's how it's going to be approved, right?
Well, I don't think so, since these are both pre-existing banks in operation. We approved a similar transfer in April, and I think it's okay to approve this transfer as well, since they're both pre-existing banks.
Does the Craig maybe can help with the does the judgment agree with that? Meaning you can transfer water if you were a pre-existing pre-judgment or pre-adjudication bank without a storage agreement, Craig?
I don't think the judgment's clear on that, Director Ariki. I think one of the main questions here is really the policy question of whether we want to require a storage agreement when there's a transfer between pre-existing banks. I don't think the rules and regulations catch that specifically. But I think the board can make the policy decision that a storage agreement is or is not necessary between pre-existing banks.
For the transfer to occur.
Yes.
Yes, hi, this is Phyllis. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, Phyllis.
I wonder if I could just have a quick comment here that might help with the discussion. So first of all, we all know that the judgment specifically says that no operation of a pre-existing bank can be significantly changed. And so it really focuses in on the word operation. And from our point of view, operation includes the annual recovery from a bank and the amounts that go in and when they go in and under what conditions they get stored, if they're stored short-term or long-term, those types of things. Because these two banks are so close together and because their storage is already likely commingled in the subsurface, and because they are both pre-existing banks, and because their operations can't be altered under the judgment. Those were the reasons that we thought in this particular case that we would recommend the approval of this transfer, even without the existing storage agreements. I agree with Kate's comments that as we did the rules and regulations, there was some concern and some differing interpretations with regard to what a storage agreement might look like for a pre-existing bank. And I think that those are things to be worked out. Having said all of that, recognizing that the judgment wouldn't let us change the operation of the pre-existing banks unless there was a material in particular, we felt like that this fell underneath the details of judgment that, and especially, again, the big thing for us is that we're always looking at protection of the basin, making sure that there's no material injury and that we understand real specifically what's being done. And in this particular case, again, this storage that is in these two banks are likely commingled in the subsurface already. So it didn't seem to us that there would be any reasonable basis for that, number one, there would be material injury, and number two, to not recommend approval of the transfer. So that was just...
Why all condition them or condition the transfer based on a successful storage agreement?
That would be fine with us if that's what the Watermaster Board would like to do.
I think what I'm confused about, it sounds like the recommendation is to approve the transfer. I don't have any problem with the transfer. I'm just trying to understand if, as you said, these are pre-existing banks and the judgment is clear on their operation, including transfer and pumping and all that. Why condition the transfer based on the completion of a successful storage agreement with these banks?
Yeah, I don't think we are conditioning it.
I thought that's what I heard Katie say.
Okay.
No, I think that since they're pre-existing banks, it's not, but I think in the future, for not pre-existing banks, it would have to have a storage agreement. So
I don't know why I heard that there was a condition in the approval. All right. Okay.
Okay, any other discussion? So we have resolution number R2032. And that includes both transfers. So have them separate. Make them separate. So
I don't so can we split this resolution?
Adam, we can, and Craig, you confirm that?
Yes, I think that's absolutely necessary. So there's a separate vote on each. Because the Exhibit A attached to Resolution 2032 at page 81 lists out both applications, and I think just for clarity's sake, in light of all the dialogue today, that it'd be best to take separate vote to adopt or not adopt Resolution 2032 as to each application.
Okay,
so what would be the motion?
I'll help you with that, Adam.
Okay.
We will start with transfer application for Hills. Is there a motion to approve that transfer request?
Well,
Go ahead.
Is there a motion to approve
the transfer request of Terra Bonita Ranch to Phelan Pinion Hills?
Can we say, is there a motion to act on it?
Well, Craig, you want to advise?
Well, I think it's the issue is whether their application for transfer to Phelan is approved by the board or not. And that, I think, is teed up appropriately through Chair Paris's motion.
So we can use the word approve.
Yes.
Okay, I move that that we approve the motion for Terra Bonita transfer.
Motion made by Adam to approve the transfer request of Terra Bonita Ranch to Phelan Pinion Hills. Is there a second? Is there a second to that motion? Directors, is there a second to that motion? Hearing no second, the motion by Adam to approve the transfer request for Terra Bonita Ranch to Phelan Pinion Hills dies for lack of a second. Now we're on to item C. We're on to the second transfer. So, is there a motion to approve the WDS California 2 transfer to AVAC?
I guess I'll have to do it too. I move that we approve the transfer of WDS to AVAC.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion? Directors, is there a second to that motion? I will second that motion. Is there any discussion?
It looks like there's a few directors are still muted, so maybe they can't unmute.
Okay, we have some directors muted, Holly. Let's do a roll call of all directors that are participating.
Derek, you're muted. You're good. Calandri's unmuted.
Kathy?
I'm here.
Okay. So we're on the WDS 422 AVAC. Motion's been made by Adam and second by the chair, Paris. Is there any discussion of that motion? Hearing no discussion, we will have a roll call vote. All in favor at that motion by roll call.
Director Riki?
Yes.
Director Calandri?
Yes.
Director McLaren?
Yes.
Director Urosic?
He's unmuted.
Gary?
Derek, are you unmuted?
Yeah, sorry guys, my computer completely locked up on me for this the second resolution we were discussing. So I apologize. I am in favor, yes, of approving the making sure the second one we talked about.
The WDS 2A.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Director Paris?
Yes. Motion carried unanimously.
Excuse me, Chair Paris?
Yes.
Do you think it'd be worth going back and double checking to make sure people had an opportunity on the Phelan Pinning Hills?
I was just about to say, I think that'd be appropriate if some people were muted. You could confirm the vote tally on the Terra Bonita transfer. Thank you.
Of course. All the directors are unmuted at this time. I just want to make sure. We'll go back to the motion made by Adam to approve the transfer request from Terra Bonita Ranch to Phelan Pinyon Hills. Is there a second to that motion? Again, is there a second to that motion? And I understand the sensitivity of this motion, so I just want to make sure all directors have had a chance to be heard on this, and I'm going to call you out. So, Director Landry, John, you will not second this motion?
No, I would love to be able to, because I would love to get this lawsuit behind us. But when I have our legal counsel explaining it in the detail in which he did, I just don't find it in good conscience to vote against his advice.
Okay, thank you, John. Director McLaren, wish to second this motion? Is Kathy unmuted?
She's unmuted.
Kathy, can you hear?
Yes, I can hear.
Okay.
I'm conflicted also because what our attorney's saying.
Okay, thank you. And Director Barry?
Yeah, I would concur with, with the council saying, as I asked a question about the legal basis for this transfer, that there is none. I would encourage, I think this is nothing against Tierra Bonita Ranch and their opportunity to do a transfer, and would encourage them, if they are, to continue that pursuit. I think this is more the counterparty they're trying to do it with. This is because of the counterparty.
And my feeling is the same. I think we're going to follow our attorney's advice. I have in the past and continue to encourage Phelan Pinyon Hills and our council to communicate, and their council to communicate, to see if there's a way to do a mediation where we could resolve all the disputes. I know that the Watermaster board at this point has a number of already spent about 48,000, almost 49,000 on this legal dispute. I can only imagine Phelan Pinion Hills has spent an incredible amount more. And if there's any way to mediate this before it gets to the, I know it's going to be heard in the appellate court soon. I think I would encourage our council and Phelan Pinion Hills Council to talk and see if all the disputes could be mediated in some way before we feel and before we have to continue to spend enormous amount of attorney fees on both sides. So that's my comment on that. So at this time, I think we need to approve resolution R 2032 directly with WDS California and ABEC.
We did a roll call vote.
So, well, I did not specifically in the motion put R, the resolution, so I just want to clarify that. So I know this is a little redundant, but I'd like to have a motion to approve resolution 2032 as to the transfer for WDS California. Is there a motion?
Motion.
I thought we voted on that already.
The motion was the approval of that one transfer, but Adam, I did not have you or anyone mention the resolution itself. So I just want to make sure our minutes are very clear that the motion is for resolution 2032 only for the transfer of WDS California to an ABEC. So it is a little redundant, but is there a motion to approve resolution number R 2032 for the transfer between WDS California and ABEC?
I'll make that motion, Kathy.
Motion made by Kathy. Is there a second to that motion?
So before we vote here, or second the motion,
motion second by Kathy.
Shouldn't it be bifurcated because it contains both transfers?
It actually, the two transfers are on an Exhibit A. Is that correct, Ray?
Yeah, so we can do the motion, if you want to do the motion as to not approve Terra Bonita to Phelan and approve WDS to ABEC. Both motions, I mean, should cover the whole thing.
It's a mess that the same resolution contained both.
We normally do it that way, but
the motion should be to approve the resolution item block.
Yeah, the motion should be to approve resolution number R 20-32 and modify Exhibit A by removing Terra Bonita and Phelan Pinion Hills from that table.
Okay,
that's fine.
That's it. That's exactly right.
And Craig, you're good with that motion?
Yes.
And I'm good with I'll make that motion as amended.
And I will second it.
Great. Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the motion to approve resolution number R 2032, excluding Tierra Bonita Ranch and Phelan Pinion Hills from Exhibit A of the motion? Craig, that is the motion. You're good with that?
Yes.
Any discussion on that motion? All in favor of the motion by roll call vote?
Director Ariki?
Yes.
Director Calandry?
Yes.
Director McLaren?
Yes.
Director Urosic?
Yes.
And Director Paris?
Yes. Motion's carried unanimously. That brings us to item C, the USGS Groundwater Monitoring Program.
Thank you, Chair Rivers. I'll take this one. This is Peter Thompson.
Go ahead. Thank you.
I'm going to put on a little bit of another hat as general manager for the state water contractors and give some context behind the letter. We've had the opportunity to brief this letter with the advisory committee, with the public water suppliers, and the administrative committee. The association, the Antelope Valley State Water Contractors Association, has funded and administrated the USGS groundwater monitoring program for the last 15 years. They did so because they felt it was important, particularly while the basin was is pursuing adjudication, that program be held up. And it's been the intent of the association for many years to shift the cost and the responsibility of administrating it to the entities that have direct use for that USGS data. And that process began back with the beginning of Antelope Valley Irwin, where they received 25% of the cost sharing, and at the initiation of the Antelope Valley Watermaster and its take on 25% of the cost share. It still is the intent of the association to continue that transfer process because they believe that it's the most appropriate place for groundwater monitoring data programs to be administered, would be with the Antelope Valley Watermasters, whose primary directive is to monitor and adjudicate this basin. So in the discussions with the different groups, some context that we feel is important to bring up is that USGS program has been going on since the 1950s. So some of that well data has been tracked annually for almost 70 years. And currently the program covers 170 wells in the Antelope Valley groundwater basin. Every point of data, groundwater level data from that USGS program and those 170 wells are used in the Antelope Valley Watermaster annual report. And that accounts for close to half of the groundwater level data. The Antelope Valley Irwin uses about 20 to 30 points of data annually from that USGS report in order to apply for grants with DWR. So it continues to be the intent to move that transfer forward to what the association feels like are entities that have a more direct use and benefit of that data. That's the intent behind the letter. We do recognize that there's a lot of discussion over it, and people haven't had a lot of time to digest the value of that program. And just happy to answer any questions and kick off the conversation about moving this program forward.
Thank you, Peter. Discussion about item C.
This is Adam. And we've discussed it. I've discussed it with Peter and at our little committee. I agree with what Peter is saying. I think the Watermaster does use the data. It's good for the AV to have this data. We access the USGS hydrographs for this data, so it's definitely a good thing to continue this program. What I suggested, giving our financial situation with the Watermaster and where we are in the process, that this 25% be pushed on the Integrated Regional Water Management Plan group. It's not a lot of money. It's $16,000. Sure, they can afford it. They always have funding from their respective board to do a lot of things anyway. And then at one point in the future, when the Watermaster is a little bit in a better financial situation and we're in a groove, maybe the Watermaster can take that away from the Integrated Regional Water Management Group. And that's how I see it for the time being, given our financial situation. And I'll defer to the other board members to maybe speak. What do they think?
Thank you, Adam. Any other directors' comments? I have a question, Peter. This action is not going to change the funding source at this point, is it?
This would be, if they were to take action on on this, then it would be included in the 2021 budget for the Antelope Valley Watermaster.
So my question is, we can take action to take over being the administrator on this item, but this item doesn't say we're assuming all the financial burden at this time. That could be phased in over time like Adam had requested.
We could definitely come back with a phased approach for that.
So that I'm looking at the action we'd be taking if we approve that the Antelope Valley Watermaster assume the role of administrator of the USGS groundwater monitoring program as requested by the Antelope Valley Water Contractors Association. Is the request that we take over all the financial obligations at this time?
That's the request in the letter, but I know that they would be willing to consider a phased approach to that.
Yeah. So good morning, this is Matt. So I think from the Watermaster staff perspective, our recommendation would be to approve the Watermaster taking over as administrator of the USGS program, and then bring back as part of our 2021 budget what portion of the funding the Watermaster can support.
And work with the Antelope Valley State Water Contractors
concurrently with that.
And the ORWAM.
Maybe we vote on taking an additional 25% responsibility.
Okay.
With the intent that maybe over a 2-year period, if there is a need to take the remaining cost.
So and I agree with you 100%, Adam. So the only motion, if we want to go forward with it today, is that the Antelope Valley Watermaster will assume the role of administrator of the USGS groundwater monitoring program, and that the financing of the program will be discussed and worked out with the other entities at another time.
That's cool.
And
this is Dave, Rob. Just some questions. I guess I'm not comfortable with, having any innuendo of saying that we would be thinking about or wanting to take additional costs. So that's my number one concern. I just want to make sure there's clarity that there's no acknowledgement of that. The second part is us taking administration role. What additional burden economically, cost-wise, do we have from staff taking on that role that will come into our budget?
Good question, Derek. Matt or Peter?
Yeah, good morning, it's Matt. So, as when I was in the role with the association that Peter has now, I was the primary point of contact with the USGS. And it was minimal cost associated with that and time. And so I would assume the similar role with the Watermaster, and I would work closely with Phyllis and Kate to ensure that we're monitoring the correct wells and the program is adequate for what the Watermaster needs. To answer your specific question about time and cost to the Watermaster, it would probably be less than $5,000 a year, just best guess. Total staff time between myself and the Watermaster engineer to take on the administration of this program.
And Phyllis or Kate, do you want to discuss the need for this groundwater monitoring program?
Sure. I'll be glad to say something about this. So, yes, Peter already gave us the information that the USGS wells are about half of the water levels that we see measured in the basin. And Adam, reaffirmed that this is a very important program to the basin. The USGS program represents the only wells that we have in 3 of the sub areas. So spatially, it's a very important program. It also is the only wells that are in a couple of areas of subsidence that we want to watch with respect to water levels. So that's another important monitoring area that we need. And the judgment does mandate that the Watermaster engineer monitor the safe yield of this groundwater basin. So without this program, it's very difficult to do that. And I know everyone is looking for cost savings, and I have no opinion as to whether or not the Watermaster can take on additional costs to fund the program. But I do see from my point of view that it's an incredibly important program to the basin. And it's really the only way that we're going to be in a position to do what is going to be required as the judgment moves forward. So I love the idea of having the IRWIMP come in. This was a previous CASGIM program, and as such, there are a lot of IRWIMPs throughout the state that manage and administer the CASGIM programs. Most of the CASGIM programs, as everyone knows, are being replaced with the GSP, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan network monitoring programs. And so ultimately, I think the CASGIM requirements will be replaced with the GSP requirements, but there will still be a need of this space to monitor its safe built components. And again, an incredibly important program. The hydrographs that Adam mentioned have been extremely important to us. It's the only way that we have to document changes in pumping and in water supply in this groundwater basin over time, and it will provide the necessary information that we need to be able to continue to monitor the native safe yield and to do a reassessment of native safe yield when the time comes as required by the judgment.
Phyllis, do you agree that Lancaster should administer this program?
I think it is a good idea to do that. I have to admit that there won't be much of a change from the Watermaster engineer's point of view, because as Matt had stated, he was already administering the program on behalf of the state contractors. And as such, he's been very generous to check in with us as the Watermaster engineer to see if there are changes needed to the program from time to time. When we first started, we actually had a detailed coordination call with USGS, and we continue to, administer the program with obviously with Matt's input. So we have been involved in that already, and I agree with Matt. I see that there are going to be additional significant costs just for the administration. But I would hope again that the IRWIMP could begin to take some of the burden. Notwithstanding the importance of the program, the Watermaster does already pay for a portion of it, and if it administers it, then that's sort of again taking a large role there. And I see how tight these budgets are, and we work so hard to make sure that we can do the work that's required to do by us for the budgets. And I just hope that there are some additional funding opportunities.
So, to answer your question, Derek, I think if we approve this motion, we would do it at the current, agreeing to do it at the current financial rate of 25%, which we've already been paying. I think how it's divided up right now is, Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, is IRWIMP is 25%, Watermaster is 25%.
Watermaster's 25, yeah, and the association
Antelope
50.
Water contract is 50%.
Correct.
So we would agree to administer this at the present financing levels. But I think what you're going to see is the Antelope Valley State Water Contractors, especially coming back and asking for some phased-in relief from their 50% obligations, since they no longer directly are involved or need this program. So, any further discussion on this?
Mr. Chairman, I kind of agree with Derek. I'm not really in favor of taking on the admin at this point in time, and I'm definitely not in favor of taking on any further expense at the time. I guess I personally don't see the need. And then I think it's just the beginning of taking over more and more expense. I think we've got some other things to get under control that are more important, like I'm going to bring up the subject about these attorney fees that we're eating, that when people like Pinion Hills and other people use up some valuable time from Mr. Parton. So I'm kind of like, I'd just like to postpone this whole thing for a year and get some of these other things under control that we're working on. And
So,
not
John,
be involved in, I wouldn't want to be in the admin or the financial at this point.
John, you've heard the discussion. If the Antelope Valley State Water Contractors decide to quit funding, you're okay with USGS going away?
So, may I speak?
Sure, Ed.
Mr. Chair? Yeah. Just so that, for those that don't know, the USGS does pay half of the cost. So we actually, the Valley does benefit from the USGS funding and expertise. John, I agree with you when it comes to cost. I'm like you. I think we're barely making it and we don't want to add. And that's exactly my reasoning why I said, let's not take the burden of the cost. But in light of what Matt said, and in light of the benefit that I think the Watermaster can reap from this program, and that is understanding the health of the groundwater basin, which is really the core responsibility of the Watermaster, is to monitor. I really don't want, the USGS will be happy to just get out of the valley and go give their money to somebody else. I don't want to lose that funding source or expertise, because the USGS is very good at what they do. And if we would add very little amount of time and effort on our part to really manage that data, meaning put it in a computer database and just keep track of it and give it to fellows to use it for the annual report, I would really recommend that we reconsider that role today, if you guys don't mind. And then you're right, the cost for the additional cost, I think we need to discuss that at a later time, whether it's a year down the road or 2 years down the road, when we're ready and have some financial resources to do it.
Thank you, Adam.
Okay.
Kathy, any discussion? Derek, anything further?
Yeah, I mean, I just, I'll chime to what John said, and I do hear what Adam's saying. I wasn't overly compelled that Phyllis said that we needed to be the administrator. I get cautious by the fact that we get creep in cost and in our budget from adding kind of a cut, 1,000 cuts type thing, 5,000 here, 5,000 there. I do believe the value of it. I do believe that the value is global within the valley and the other parties, and it's maybe a little bit of politicking on who pays the bill. But our number one responsibility is to the constituents we represent and making sure we have a balanced budget. So I weigh that very well as it probably as important as the data. Just as important as the data that we collect, and if we can collect it without spending the dollars, that's I really like that. So that's my point.
I'm sorry, I was trying to unmute and it was hitting it, wasn't letting me. I also am on the state water, the Antelope Valley State Water Contractors. So I feel kind of like torn between, but at the same time, I feel like if it's really a value, then eventually we should put it and let whoever really should be in charge of it in charge of it. And so my understanding is, and I think that it's very useful to the Watermaster, but I'll agree to whichever way we choose to go about it. If we choose to administer it and talk about phasing in, I'm all for that. Unless at some point we decide that we don't really need this information. But if this entity is using that information, then I feel that we should partner at least in the cost of that.
Thank you, Kathy. Appreciate that. My feelings, I think I've expressed them. I'll try to summarize them again. I think strongly that the Watermaster should be the administrator of the program. I think it's the Watermaster who gets the most good out of it. I think we can easily punt the funding down for another year or 2 years, all according to how the funding partners want to go. But that's not the question before us today. The question before us is, should we administer this program? And I think Phyllis has answered that question, and so has Matthew, that we should administer it. The costs are going to be very minimal to administer it, and we will have another vote on another day if we want to take on more of the funding aspects of it, because that's not what we're deciding today. So with that said, any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, is there a motion for the Navy Watermaster to assume the role as administrator of the U.S. ground monitoring program, and maybe just throw in there at the current funding level of 25%, so it's very clear we're not agreeing to fund this at any greater amounts at this time.
I'll make that.
Motion made by Adam, seconded by Kathy.
Yes.
Okay. Motion made by Adam, seconded by Kathy. Is there any further discussion on that motion?
So just to be clear, the motion does specifically say at the current financial contribution.
Of 25%, correct?
Correct, okay.
And that, Patty, that's how the motion will read when it comes back. Okay, that's the motion. Any further discussion on that motion? Hearing no further discussion, all in favor of that motion by roll call vote?
Director Ricky?
Yes.
Director Calandri?
Due to the respect that I have for my fellow directors, I have been convinced my answer is yes.
Director McLaren?
Yes.
Director Urosic?
Yes.
And Director Paris?
Yes. Thank you, everyone. And we will go on to item number B, memorandum recovery of general counsel fee, and that's going to be Craig.
Yes, you recall at the last session there was there's been continuing conversation and concern that we do everything possible to allocate the dispensing of legal services to particular parties and recover those where at all possible. The memo that you have in your packet starting at page 116 spells out the various areas that we are permitted explicitly by the judgment or the rules and regulations to recover reasonable attorney's fees. And they are significant, obviously, in collecting delinquent assessments and compelling compliance with monitoring requirements. We can get fees and recovery of that. And we can also get our fees when investigating a party's legal authority to enter into a transfer. That arose from a recent transfer that got very complicated. In fact, just as background, I think that particular transfer a few months ago was the genesis of a lot of the concern, because it was concentrated attorney time to figure out some of the transfer issues, and that became a very costly endeavor to which we did not recover the fees and costs directly from the applicants. So that is what we are capable now of recovering. We're also capable of recovering our reasonable costs connected with applications for new production. And the memo basically says that is probably the most fertile ground for shoring up the rules and regulations and the application form to reflect the fact that the Watermaster can recover attorney's fees, reasonable attorney's fees incurred in the process of responding, investigating, reviewing a new production application. And pursuant to discussions with staff, my recommendation from the memo is that we come back specifically at the next meeting with specific amendments to the rules and regulations that would reflect the basis for getting reasonable attorney's fees in connection with the new production application, and anywhere else that we think recovery of fees would be valuable. I know Matt and staff have thought about this also, so I want to give them a chance to comment about what we see as the most productive area in terms of recovery of fees. Remember, and the last thing I'll say is just remember that the judgment reflects that all the parties are to bear their own fees and costs unless otherwise stated in the judgment or in a court order. And so we have to have explicit authority to recover reasonable attorney's fees, and there should be notice that people are going to incur those and that they will pay those in connection with any approval by the board. Before I take questions, Matt, is there anything to add from the staff side?
No, I think you covered it well, Craig. I could just add that staff would like to bring back to the board for consideration a revision to our fee schedule to make sure it's clear and consistent with the legal analysis that Ms. Parton put together, so that staff has a clear and consistent process of recouping legal fees for applicants or from applicants. So that would be proposed to bring that back at our next meeting.
Okay. But let me just add that the attorney's fees expended on new production applications, other than that one of a couple of months ago, have not been huge, or it's largely insignificant in that area. Where they are significant is collection efforts against people delinquent in their assessment payments. That is, in my view, is where the big ticket item is, and we already have authority to get our fees back in pursuing delinquent assessments.
Okay.
So with that, I open it up to questions or comments.
Thank you.
But just so I'm clear, there's no action item today, but we plan on and will bring back specific amendments to the rules and regulations for this board's approval at the next December meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Craig. Any discussion by directors?
This is Adam. I mean, just a comment. I thank you, Craig. I think this is the right direction that we're going, so I appreciate it. I look forward to the amendment to the rules and regulations and the fee schedule.
Okay. Any further discussion? So no action is going to be taken. Everyone is aware that Craig will bring back and staff will bring back recommendation for amending the rules and regulations to put some more guidance into when we can collect attorney fees. Great. Okay. That brings us on to administrator's report.
Good morning, it's Matt. The only thing I have to report is that we are working on the draft 2021 budget for the Watermaster. We look forward to working with the advisory committee and the administrative committee of the board during the month of November. And then just a reminder to everyone that there will be no meeting in the month of November due to the holiday, but the next meeting will be on Wednesday, December 2nd. So I just want to make that clear to everybody.
Wednesday, December 2nd?
Correct.
And notices will be mailed?
Yes.
Thank
We'll
you.
get a meeting invite out to everybody.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And that's all I have to report unless there are any questions.
Very good. Then we're on Watermaster Engineer report. Phyllis Kate.
This is Kate. I'll take this one. At the last board meeting, the Watermaster was asked to provide an accounting of all approved new production. And a summary of that is on page 119 of the packet. And that lists about 48 parties who've been approved new production. 5 of those parties have decided not to install a well for various reasons. And the total amounts to 364.1816 acre feet. But note that 215 acre feet of this was associated with Ron Bannock's application that was approved last month and was only approved for water use in 2020 and 2021. So if you subtract that 215, you get about 149 acre feet of new production that's been approved.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Anything further?
That's all I have.
Great. Any questions, directors? Hearing none?
No.
Oh, go ahead, Adam.
No, I don't have any question. Thank you.
Going on to item 11, General Counsel's report.
Yes, I can be relatively brief. Feeling we've already covered in the extensive discussions about the transfer application. So nothing further on that. Item 2 was a memorandum that was generated in response to Mr. Wood's question about whether we have the authority under the judgment to, lack of a better word, deprioritize industrial use. There's a very short memo at page 122 of your packet that sets up what the issue was that Mr. Wood was concerned about. It arose out of the Bannock application, and he raised this concern pursuant to the board meeting in September. And his concern and in question as to whether we being the board, Watermaster, could deprioritize industrial uses and not use groundwater, require applicants to use other sources of non-groundwater extraction sources to meet their production needs. And our review of the judgment is that setting up a hierarchy of use is specifically prohibited under the judgment, and the terms of the judgment are reflected in the short memo. And we're really bound by the terms of the judgment and are not authorized to prioritize industrial versus ag or domestic, specifically as reflected in the judgment, and the sections are cited in that memo. So that was in response to that comment where the board directed some input on the issue of deprioritizing. And then status of enforcement letters. We've got several tranches of such letters getting prepared now that'll go out before, hopefully, another week or so, to people that are late in the assessments and who are getting a final notice, and those who are getting the first notice. And we'll work with staff on that and update this board as to where we are on it. They did not go out before the board meeting, but in coordination with staff, we'll get those out shortly. And then finally, the SCI settlement update. SCI is Joshua Memorial Park, and they have been in discussions to resolve the dispute over the quantum of their production right under the judgment with a number of parties. And it appears that that is going toward a resolution that will be presumably confirmed by the court in some type of hearing, either evidentiary hearing or some other type of hearing. So the court will put its imprimatur on whatever production right SCI and the parties negotiating with SCI agree upon. And right now, the only other matter set in that case is a case management conference for December 8th. It's possible that could be potentially converted to an evidentiary hearing where SCI proves up its production right. But all I'm privy to now is that there's active, ongoing, productive discussions between SCI and interested parties to try to get a resolution about what the reasonable production right is of SCI, and the parties have been working cooperatively to do that. And I don't believe there's anything else on the report, Mr. Chair.
Great. Thank you, Craig. Any questions from directors?
Did they set the appeal hearing or argument or whatever?
Yes.
What is that schedule?
I believe, and you probably can rely on those that have filed the papers more so than I, but I believe the argument is 1:30 in the afternoon on Monday, November 9th.
November 9th.
And I do plan on appearing by Zoom, at least as an interested audience member, to hear the oral argument on that. But I would welcome a comment of those that have filed papers and will be arguing that to confirm or disconfirm the date that I just gave.
Still online. I know Warren is not. Laura, do you know? I guess we're the only one.
I would go with the November 9th. That's what our...
Thank you. I'll confirm that with Warren.
Okay.
Greg, is that something the directors could attend by Zoom or court call? Or...
I can find that out for you, whether there's a trick in being a party and not direct counsel in the case. It should be a public meeting. Normally, Court of Appeals hearings are open to the public, and it shouldn't be anything different, but because of the COVID situation, I'll check that and report back to the board as to what the details are. I've never appeared in a court appeal hearing by remote access, so this will be a first also. So,
okay, would the directors be interested in us following up on that and providing you instructions on how to?
I'd like to.
Okay.
Then, Craig, if you'll just let Patty know, and then Patty will email all the directors.
It'll be done.
Great. Thank you. Okay. Anything else from Craig? Seeing none, we're on board members' requests for future agenda items. Directors, any requests for future agenda items?
Not at this point.
Okay. Hearing none, I want to thank everybody for attending, and we're getting better and better at these meetings. I want to call and Angel for helping with the administering of these meetings and making them run smoothly.
We were just wishing how we can see each other again, so we don't want to get used to this.
Well, at the next meeting, we can put everybody on the screen so everybody can see each other. Okay.
Adam, I've gotten so old, Adam, you wouldn't even recognize me anymore.
Not you, John. Not living by the beach now.
Well, everybody be safe, and at this time, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much.
Happy Thanksgiving to everyone if we don't see everyone.
Yes, same to you all.
Yes. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Man, how do I do that?
Oh, thank you.
There it is. I better drive better than I thought. Yeah.